Was Supergirl always doomed to fail at the box office? Or could it have succeeded with just a few key fixes? I'm Wilbur Wednesday, and I've got the solution. "2026's Supergirl got mixed reviews, and as of now is not likely to make as much money as its predecessor, 2025's Superman. Was this cinematic sophomore slump for James Gunn's DCU inevitable? Or could Supergirl have been just as profitable if the head honchos in charge had just made some adjustments? Well, using my powers of research and reasoning, I've come up with 7 suggestions for changes that could have made Supergirl a more profitable movie. These are the 7 ways Supergirl could have been more successful. Number 7. Lobo should have been a no-go. I know this might sound condescending, but when superhero movies are successful, the leading actors do, at least for some time, become their characters in the mind of the public. If you were around back then, you knew how intensely Robert Downey Jr.'s reputation became fused to his portrayal of Tony Stark. And to go back even further than that, Michael Keaton was so defined by his time as Batman that his first Oscar nomination was for playing an actor who's haunted by his past role as a superhero that's clearly some kind of Batman parody. And then, of course, he came back as Batman for 2021's The Flash. The reason I point this out is because one of the most financially successful superhero movies of all time is 2018's Aquaman. I know, in a perfect world, audiences could just approach each film with a blank slate in their heads every time. But let's be honest, they don't. And to be frank, the fact that they don't is kinda one of the big reasons why superhero movies, based on characters made decades ago, can be such a profitable business. So, if you're a Hollywood executive at Warner/DC/Paramount, etc., you should try to make that sense of familiarity feel easy to the audience, instead of giving them these off-putting little association challenges like the guy famous for playing Aquaman is now playing a character that has absolutely nothing to do with Aquaman in a world where Aquaman must definitely exist to some extent. I know Jason Momoa is popular, but even when the faces and names are familiar, audiences will hesitate to pay if they feel like they have to ask one too many questions about who's who and what's what now. If you don't believe me, consult the box office numbers for Pixar's Lightyear, the 2022 movie that's supposed to be a movie that Andy from Toy Story watched in 1995. Casting aside, there's another issue with Lobo being in this movie. It is distracting for there to be this big goofy clown man sidekick in a film that's essentially about 2 traumatized young women fighting against some dudes who are clearly meant to be akin to human traffickers. That might sound like an overly morbid interpretation of the movie on my part, but as they say in the film, the bad guys in this movie are mainly on a quest to abduct as many young girls as possible so that they can use them to reproduce since the species has no women. Pretty clear what kinds of felonies are being implied and evoked by these villains' actions and motivations. Now, I don't think it's beyond the pale for a Supergirl story to address heavy or sensitive topics, but it does seem a little too unwieldy for a movie that's also trying to sell smiling collectible figurines at KFC. And you know who's also unwieldy? Lobo, whose goofy, technically not Aquaman energy does seem to be repelling the general movie-going public. Speaking of those offensive villains, here's the 6th way Supergirl could have been more of a box office success. Number 6. Give Supergirl a more memorable supervillain. Like I said earlier, the bad guys in Supergirl are not fun. And hey, villains in a movie don't need to be fun. But given that this is a superhero movie, inevitably part of this movie's business model is selling people an action figure of this uninteresting looking guy whose main backstory is his agenda to commit assaults against defenseless young women in general, and that just doesn't seem very profitable. Or, to put it another way, every successful superhero movie sells action figures of the supervillain. And so, if you want your superhero movie to be financially successful, it's likely you want to create a supervillain design that people would want to buy, instead of a dull-looking guy whose motives generally revolve around parallels to depressing real-life crimes. Or, to put it yet another way, people like fun supervillain designs. Why didn't this movie have one of those? Speaking of fancier stuff the movie could have had, number 5. Give Supergirl her own sensational theme music. What do Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman have in common? They all have movies that have sold well, and in those movies there's usually some kind of distinct, often orchestral background song that basically serves as their key music. Think of Batman's music from the Tim Burton films, or the John Williams theme from the 70s Superman movies, or that electric-sounding theme for Wonder Woman in the Snyder films. Now, if you look up the soundtrack for Supergirl, she does have a song that's supposed to be a theme, and it's not a bad song, but it sounds more like typical fantasy action movie music than an actual character theme. I bet if they came up with something more memorable for her theme, people would be more willing to line up at the box office. Now sure, there are superheroes whose movies have sold well without a memorable key music theme, but at this stage in superhero movie saturation, you gotta pull out all the stops, and music's probably a good angle for getting a box office advantage. Alright, next on the list of proposals to make this movie more profitable, I've got another element of the film that could have made more of a splash. Number 4, give Supergirl's sidekick more star power. Supergirl's main sidekick in this movie is Ruthie, an alien gal with a sword and a deadly grudge. So why does she look and sound like a human school kid who got lost on a field trip? I guess that'd make sense if she was just supposed to be a civilian. But she has a sword. Let her be cool. Cool characters make it easier for stuff like this to make money. That's gotta be one of the main rules of the superhero movie business. Speaking of sidekicks, another one of Supergirl's pals is the focus of the third entry on this list of profitability improvements. Number 3, should have let Krypto do more stuff. In the 2025 Superman movie, Krypto is abducted by the bad guys, and Superman goes off to get Krypto back. In 2026's Supergirl, Krypto gets poisoned by the bad guys, and Supergirl has to get the antidote from the bad guys to get Krypto's health back. Since Krypto in this version of the DCU has a closer relationship to Supergirl than Superman, you'd think this movie would give him more to do. But for most of the film, he's just out of action from being poisoned. That's not necessarily a bad thing in regards to the movie's quality, but if you want to win over more tickets from the people who saw the last Superman movie, I think this movie could get those if it showed them more of the stuff Krypto can do when he's not abducted. It could give more character and a sense of context to the little dog that would make both films more rewarding to watch for the DCU's paying customers. Also, aside from rewarding the DCU loyalists, people in general like cute dogs doing stuff. For instance, as far as I know, in the Air Bud movies, Air Bud isn't out of the way most of the time because he got poisoned or abducted, and his movies have made a lot of cash throughout the years. So why not do more for fans of dog heroes? For fun and profit, have Krypto do more stuff. Speaking of dogs, here's a suggestion that might get me in the doghouse. Number 2. Maybe all the DCU films don't need to try to be like James Gunn. Look, I get this one might be in vain. James Gunn wrote and directed Superman, and he's the main creative head of the DCU. So even though Supergirl wasn't written or directed by Gunn, it makes sense that the movie is trying to do that kind of mix of goofiness, melancholy, and violence that Gunn is known for. But to put it bluntly, the mix of all that stuff in this movie came off kinda shaky, so I couldn't help but think that maybe the director and writer would have had a better time managing the tone of Supergirl if they weren't trying to emulate Gunn's specific mix of tones so much. After all, the appeal of Marvel/DC type superhero universes is that there's a bunch of different superheroes doing different things. And so, even if she is so closely related to Superman, Supergirl's still her own character getting into her own situations, and that allows her adventures to have different tones and visuals than Superman's. I know the MCU seemed like it was successful by keeping everything similar, but James Gunn's MCU movies succeeded at least in part because they seemed so different from the MCU's other movies while still being in continuity with them. And I think Gunn should give the other writers and directors DCU movies a chance to do that. If they're all stuck trying too hard to be like James Gunn, it's gonna make the DCU films that aren't written and directed by James Gunn feel too much like imperfect imitations of his style. And that's just not likely to fly with critics and audiences. And now, last but not least, my final take on how Supergirl could have gotten more ticket sales. Number 1. The promotional materials should have matched the tone of the film better. Maybe it's just me, but it seems like the posters for this movie made it seem like Supergirl was going to be a movie about Supergirl being a devil-may-care party person. And while there are some brief scenes that are kind of like that at the beginning of the film, for the most part, like I said earlier, this is a movie that's mostly centered on a fairly serious revenge quest against villains who are essentially human traffickers in all but name. Now, I get that being the overarching plot may seem muddled by some of the wackier stuff going on in parts, like Jason Momoa looking kind of like one of the guys from Cats. But if you've seen the movie, I think you'd agree that the cool and disaffected Supergirl seen in the movie's posters isn't really the grim and uneasy Supergirl you get in the movie. Now, I'm not exactly sure how you could convey the intended tone of that through the things superhero films usually have to use to promote themselves, like KFC toy tie-in meals and novelty popcorn buckets, but maybe they could have at least figured out more fitting posters. That seems like something that would have helped audiences and critics' responses to the film. If you like these insights into how Supergirl could have flown higher at the box office, please like, subscribe and comment. And if you didn't like this video, consider this. You can try to pay me to stop making these by purchasing a nice digital cup of my very own patented drink, Wilbur Wednesday's Magic beverage. YouTube won't let me post the link, so please look it up on itch.io yourself and buy my magic beverage today. Thank you.